In the twilight of the 11th century, a fractured Europe did the unthinkable. Kings, knights, and peasants united under a single banner, answering a pope's call to reclaim Jerusalem from the hands of infidels. This was no ordinary war. It was a holy crusade, a divine gamble where faith collided with ambition, and an entire continent marched eastward, armed with crosses and steel. From the frostbitten villages of France to the sun-scorched deserts of Anatolia, the Crusaders forged an unholy alliance, bound by vows of penance and dreams of glory. But beneath the sacred rhetoric lurked a darker truth. This war would test not just their piety, but their very humanity. Pope Urban II's sermon at Clermont ignited a firestorm. Peasants abandoned plows, lords mortgaged lands, and armies of the desperate surged toward Constantinople, their hearts aflame with promises of salvation. Yet unity came at a price. Rival nobles clashed, cultures collided, and the line between holy mission and blood-soaked conquest blurred. What began as a quest to save Christendom would birth empires, shatter alliances, and stain the Holy Land with horrors never forgotten. This is the story of how Europe's greatest gamble reshaped the world and left a legacy of fire. Before we unravel the chaos and conquest, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more ominous history videos. We greatly appreciate your support. Now, let's march east. Byzantium under siege 1095. The medieval world trembled as the Byzantine Empire faced existential collapse. Emperor Alexios I, ruler of Constantinople, watched in horror as Seljuk Turkish armies devoured Anatolia, the empire's heartland. Once a bastion of Christian power, Byzantium had lost Jerusalem to Muslim rule in 1071, and now its very survival hung in the balance. Desperate, Alexios sent envoys to Pope Urban II, pleading for mercenaries to repel the invaders. His letter framed the crisis as a holy cause, a chance for Latin Christians to redeem themselves by aiding their Eastern brethren. Urban II saw an opportunity. At the Council of Clermont in November 1095, he delivered a thunderous sermon to a crowd of nobles, clergy, and peasants. "Let those who have fought against their brothers now fight the barbarians," he declared, promising spiritual rewards for reclaiming Jerusalem. The crowd erupted with cries of "God wills it," a slogan that would echo across Europe. Urban's call fused piety with politics, aiming to redirect Europe's violent knights toward a unified enemy. The Seljuk Turks, meanwhile, were no monolith. Fractured by internal rivalries, their conquests had destabilized trade routes and pilgrimage paths to the Holy Land. Muslim rulers in Baghdad and Cairo viewed the Seljuks as upstarts, complicating alliances. For Christian pilgrims, the journey to Jerusalem had become perilous, with reports of banditry and extortion. Urban's plea tapped into both fear and fervor, framing the crusade as a sacred duty to protect pilgrims and reclaim Christ's birthplace. Alexios I expected disciplined mercenaries, not the zealous hordes that would soon flood his lands. His alliance with Urban was pragmatic, not spiritual. Byzantium's survival depended on Western military aid, but the emperor distrusted Latin ambitions. This tension between Greek and Latin Christianity would simmer beneath the Crusade's surface, erupting in betrayals and bloodshed. The People's Crusade 1096. Among the first to answer Urban's call was Peter the Hermit, a ragged preacher with a fiery tongue. By spring 1096, he had amassed a mob of 20,000 peasants, vagabonds, and minor knights. Armed with scythes and crosses, they believed divine favor would shield them from Seljuk arrows. Peter's followers ignored warnings to wait for the noble-led armies marching east with reckless fervor. The stage was set for chaos. Urban's message spread like wildfire, reaching far beyond the nobility. Peasants, monks, and even children began preparing for the journey east, convinced God would guide them. Few understood the scale of the conflict ahead. The First Crusade had begun not as a single army, but as a wave of movements, each driven by faith, greed, or desperation. Alexios's plea had unleashed forces even he could not control. Their journey quickly turned sinister. As the People's Crusade entered the Rhineland, anti-Jewish violence erupted. Crusaders accused Jewish communities of killing Christ and launched pogroms in cities like Speyer and Worms. Mobs burned synagogues and forced conversions, claiming their holy mission justified the atrocities. Local bishops tried to protect Jews, but the frenzy could not be contained. These massacres foreshadowed the Crusade's darker legacy, the blurring of holy war and persecution. By August 1096, Peter's disorganized horde reached Constantinople. Emperor Alexios I, horrified by their lack of discipline, hastily ferried them across the Bosporus into Anatolia. Without supplies or strategy, the Crusaders pillaged Byzantine villages, alienating their supposed allies. Seljuk scouts tracked their movements, biding their time. The end came at Civitote, a makeshift camp near the ruins of Nicaea. On October 21st, Turkish horsemen descended on the Crusaders at dawn. Archers rained death from a distance, while cavalry charges trampled the panicked masses. Thousands were slaughtered, and survivors were sold into slavery. Peter the Hermit, absent during the battle, later rejoined the nobles' armies in shame. The People's Crusade's collapse revealed the peril of untrained zeal. Without leadership or logistics, faith alone could not conquer armies. Yet its failure did not deter the knights and nobles already mobilizing across Europe. Their campaign, better funded and organized, would soon test whether steel and strategy could succeed where blind devotion had failed. Princes' armies march east 1096 to 1097. By late 1096, Europe's nobility had answered Urban's call. Godfrey of Bouillon, Duke of Lower Lorraine, mortgaged his lands to fund an army. Raymond of Toulouse, a veteran of Iberian wars against Muslims, brought Provençal knights. Bohemond of Taranto, a cunning Norman prince, saw the crusade as a chance to carve his own kingdom from Byzantine territory. These leaders, though rivals, shared a goal: to secure glory and salvation. The princes' armies took separate routes to Constantinople. Godfrey marched through Hungary, clashing with locals over stolen supplies. Raymond's forces skirted the Adriatic, weathering storms and dysentery. Bohemond crossed the Balkans, his Normans eyeing Byzantine wealth with envy. Alexios I demanded oaths of fealty from each commander, insisting reconquered lands be returned to Byzantium. Reluctantly, most nobles agreed, except Raymond, who swore only to respect the emperor's life. Tensions flared as crusaders arrived in Constantinople. Bohemond, whose father had once invaded Byzantine Greece, was received with icy suspicion. Godfrey's troops nearly brawled with imperial guards over food prices. Alexios housed the nobles in lavish palaces while their men camped outside the city walls, feeding rumors of Byzantine treachery. The emperor's gifts of gold and silk did little to ease distrust. In April 1097, the Crusade's combined forces, 40,000 strong, crossed into Anatolia. Alexios provided guides and siege engineers, but his absence from the campaign spoke volumes. The Byzantines wanted Anatolia reclaimed, not Jerusalem. For the Crusaders, however, the Holy City remained the ultimate prize. The alliance was fragile, a marriage of convenience that would soon fracture. The march began under a brutal summer sun. Armored knights suffocated in the heat, while infantrymen collapsed from thirst. Seljuk raiders shadowed the army, picking off stragglers. Yet discipline held. Unlike Peter's rabble, these men were professionals. Their first test loomed, the fortified Seljuk city of Nicaea, gateway to Anatolia. Siege of Nicaea 1097. The ancient city of Nicaea, a jewel of northwestern Anatolia, stood as the first major obstacle for the Crusaders after crossing into Seljuk territory. Surrounded by formidable stone walls, stretching over 3 miles and dotted with hundreds of towers, the city was a testament to Byzantine engineering, now held by the Seljuk Turks. Its strategic location on the eastern shore of Lake Ascanius made it a vital stronghold, controlling trade routes and serving as a base for raids into Byzantine lands. For Sultan Kilij Arslan I, Nicaea was both a symbol of his power and a shield against Christian reconquest. The Crusader armies, bolstered by Byzantine engineers and guides, arrived in May 1097. Godfrey of Bouillon, Raymond of Toulouse, and Bohemond of Taranto coordinated their forces to encircle the city's landward sides, while Emperor Alexios I deployed a fleet of ships to blockade the lake. The Seljuk garrison, confident in their defenses, mocked the besiegers from the ramparts, hurling insults and arrows. Early assaults proved futile. Crusader ladders were too short to scale the walls, and siege towers burned under cascades of Greek fire. The stalemate stretched into weeks, with both sides enduring scorching summer heat and dwindling supplies. Alexios I played a delicate diplomatic game. While publicly supporting the Crusaders, he secretly opened negotiations with Nicaea's Turkish defenders. Fearing the Western Knights might sack the city and claim it for themselves, the emperor offered lenient terms, surrender to Byzantine authority, and the garrison would be spared. Meanwhile, the Crusaders, unaware of these talks, redoubled their efforts. Sappers tunneled beneath the walls, only to be met by countermining Seljuk troops in claustrophobic underground skirmishes. The stench of rotting corpses and smoldering rubble filled the air as the siege dragged on. A breakthrough came in mid-June when Byzantine ships, disguised as civilian transports, smuggled soldiers through the lake gates under cover of darkness. These troops overwhelmed the guards and opened the city's main gates to the Crusaders. To their shock, the Latin Knights found Byzantine banners already flying over Nicaea's citadel. Alexios had orchestrated the city's surrender without their knowledge, ensuring its return to imperial control. The Seljuk garrison, granted safe passage, slipped away under Byzantine escort, leaving the Crusaders with empty streets and denied plunder. Resentment simmered among the rank and file. Many had envisioned Nicaea's riches as just reward for their suffering, only to be cheated by Byzantine cunning. Knights grumbled about Alexios' betrayal while foot soldiers scavenged for scraps in abandoned homes. Yet the siege's success could not be denied. Nicaea's fall shattered Seljuk dominance in northwestern Anatolia and secured a vital base for the Crusade's advance. Kilij Arslan, humiliated by the loss of his capital, fled eastward to regroup, his reputation among rival Turkish clans in tatters. The capture of Nicaea marked a pivotal alliance and foreshadowed its unraveling. While Alexios celebrated the city's return to Byzantium, the Crusaders grew wary of his shadowy pragmatism. Supplies were replenished, strategies revised, and the march toward the Holy Land resumed. But the seeds of distrust had been sown. For now, the combined forces pressed onward, their eyes fixed on distant Jerusalem, unaware of the trials that lay ahead in the sun-baked plains of Anatolia. Battle of Dorylaeum, year 1097. On July 1st, 1097, Bohemond of Taranto's vanguard camped in a valley near Dorylaeum. At dawn, Seljuk horsemen emerged from the hills, arrows darkening the sky. Turkish horse archers encircled the Crusaders, exploiting their lack of ranged weapons. Bohemond ordered his knights to dismount, using shields to form a defensive ring. Women and children in the camp huddled behind baggage carts, praying as the dead piled high. For hours, the Crusaders endured the storm. Men collapsed from heat stroke, horses screamed with arrow wounds. Just as morale crumbled, Godfrey of Bouillon's forces crashed into the Seljuk flank. Raymond of Toulouse's army followed, swords glinting. The Turks, trapped between Bohemon's shield wall and fresh cavalry, broke ranks. Kilij Arslan fled, abandoning his camp and treasure. Dorylaeum proved the Crusaders could adapt. By combining infantry resilience with knightly charges, they had turned certain defeat into victory. The Seljuks' hit-and-run tactics had failed against Western discipline. Yet the cost was staggering. Thousands lay dead, and the path ahead offered little respite. The Crusaders plundered the Seljuk camp, seizing gold, weapons, and livestock. But the arid plains of Anatolia held no cities to conquer, no allies to resupply them. Hunger and thirst became their new enemies. For every soldier felled by Turkish arrows, 3 more succumbed to starvation. As summer waned, the march grew dire. Knights butchered war horses for meat, while peasants scavenged roots. Water sources were tainted with corpses, spreading disease. Yet the Crusaders pressed on, driven by faith and the fading hope of Jerusalem. Their next trial awaited at Antioch, a city so fortified it was said to be impregnable. Anatolian Nightmare Famine Skirmishes, 1097. The Crusaders' victory at Dorylaeum came at a steep cost. With Seljuk forces retreating, the path through Anatolia stretched barren and sun-scorched. Water sources dwindled to muddy puddles, and the relentless heat baked armor into flesh. Supply lines from Constantinople grew unreliable, forcing soldiers to slaughter pack animals for meat. Dysentery and dehydration thinned the ranks, leaving trails of graves across the plateau. Turkish raiders exploited the chaos. Light cavalry ambushed stragglers, vanishing before knights could counterattack. Peasant camp followers, women, children, and elderly, suffered worst, picked off as easy prey. One chronicler described mothers abandoning infants to lighten their load, their wails echoing across the wastes. The Crusade's holy purpose clashed with the grim reality of survival. Leadership fractures emerged. Raymond of Toulouse argued for pressing forward, while Bohemond of Taranto urged raiding nearby settlements. Godfrey of Bouillon, ever pragmatic, mediated between factions. Tempers flared when a Norman knight stole water meant for Provençal troops, sparking a brawl that left 3 dead. Unity, the Crusade's greatest strength, began to unravel under the Anatolian sun. By late 1097, the army reached the Anti-Taurus Mountains. Here, Armenian Christians offered respite, providing food and guides. Local rulers saw the Crusaders as allies against Seljuk oppression, trading supplies for protection. This brief relief revived morale, but the mountains hid new perils. Narrow passes perfect for ambushes and landslides triggered by summer rains. The march toward Antioch resumed, slower now. Scouts brought tales of a city so fortified that not even birds could breach its walls. Yet turning back was unthinkable. Every hardship was framed as divine trial, every death as martyrdom. The Crusaders pressed on, their ranks gaunt but resolute. The true test of their faith and endurance lay ahead. Baldwin's gambit seizing Edessa. While the main army trudged toward Antioch, Baldwin of Bouillon, Godfrey's ambitious brother, veered east. Invited by the Armenian lord Thoros to defend Edessa from Seljuks, Baldwin saw opportunity. With 100 knights, he arrived in February 1098, welcomed as a savior. Thoros, childless and unpopular, adopted Baldwin as his heir, a decision he soon regretted. Thoros' assassination weeks later remains shrouded in mystery. Armenian chroniclers accuse Baldwin of plotting with disgruntled nobles. Crusader accounts blame a mob uprising. Whatever the truth, Baldwin emerged as Edessa's ruler, founding the first Crusader state. His coup blended opportunism and pragmatism, a Christian fortress to resupply the main army and anchor Latin power in the east. Edessa's wealth stunned Baldwin. Nestled on trade routes between Mesopotamia and Anatolia, the city boasted lush farms and bustling markets. Baldwin levied taxes, recruited Armenian soldiers, and fortified defenses. His success attracted Frankish mercenaries and pilgrims, creating a hybrid realm of Western and Armenian traditions. The establishment of Edessa marked a pivotal shift. No longer mere pilgrims, the Crusaders had become conquerors. Baldwin's independent rule defied Emperor Alexius' demand for returned territories, foreshadowing future clashes between Crusader States and Byzantium. Meanwhile, the main army's grueling siege of Antioch entered its 6th month, and desperation brewed mutiny. Siege of Antioch begins 1097 to 1098. Antioch, ancient crossroads of empires, loomed as the Crusade's greatest obstacle. Its walls, built by Byzantine engineers and reinforced by Arabs, stretched 4 miles with 400 towers. The Seljuk governor Yagi Sian commanded a garrison of thousands, stockpiling years of supplies. In October 1097, the Crusaders surrounded the city, too exhausted to assault it directly. Starvation soon gripped the besiegers. Winter rains flooded camps, rotting tents and spoiling food. Horses died, leaving knights to fight on foot. Desertion spiked. A Norman noble named Stephen of Blois fled to Constantinople, claiming the crusade was doomed. Yagi Sian mocked the invaders, dangling bread from the walls, while his archers picked off foragers. Bohemond of Taranto emerged as the siege's driving force. He organized foraging raids into Syrian villages, seizing grain and livestock. His charisma held the army together, but whispers spread that he coveted Antioch for himself. Raymond of Toulouse, wary of Bohemond's ambition, rivaled him for influence. The Crusaders' unity frayed alongside their bellies. By March 1098, the situation turned dire. A Fatimid embassy from Egypt offered an alliance against the Seljuks, promising safe passage to Jerusalem if the Crusaders abandoned Antioch. The nobles debated. Some saw the proposal as salvation, others as a trap. In the end, they refused. To quit Antioch would dishonor their dead and cede victory to Yagi Sian. The siege ground on, a war of attrition with no end in sight. Then, in June 1098, a breakthrough came from an unlikely source. An Armenian tower guard named Firuz, disillusioned with Yagi Sian's rule. Secret envoys reached Bohemond, offering to open the gates, for a price. The Crusaders' luck, it seemed, had finally turned. Antioch Betrayed Firuz opens the gates. Firuz's betrayal was born of resentment. A Christian convert, he felt slighted by Yagysian's Muslim officers. Through intermediaries, he promised Bohemond access to his tower in exchange for wealth and protection. On the night of June 2nd, 1098, Bohemond led a small force to the designated spot. A rope ladder was lowered. Crusaders scaled the walls, slaughtering the guards. Chaos erupted as the invaders flung open Antioch's gates. Knights poured into the city, their hunger fueling brutality. Yagysian, roused from sleep, fled on horseback but fell to his death in a ravine. By dawn, the Crusaders controlled Antioch, except the citadel, where Turkish holdouts rained arrows. The streets ran red with the blood of soldiers and civilians alike. Plunder proved disappointing. Years of siege had drained Antioch's stores, and the Crusaders' hunger persisted. Worse, a Seljuk relief army led by Kerbogha of Mosul was days away. Having taken the city, the Crusaders now faced starvation within its walls. Bohemond claimed lordship over Antioch, hoarding what little food remained. Raymond of Toulouse protested, igniting a feud that would splinter the crusade. Kerbogha's approach forced a desperate choice: defend Antioch or abandon it. Weakened by months of privation, the Crusaders prepared for a last stand. They barred the gates, repaired walls, and scoured the city for scraps. Some resorted to boiling leather straps for broth. The Holy Lance's discovery, however, would soon reignite their fervor and alter the course of the siege. Kerbogha's counter-siege, trapped in Antioch 1098. Kerbogha's army arrived on June 5th, 1098, encircling Antioch with 30,000 troops. The Seljuk general, confident and ruthless, demanded surrender. "You are trapped like rats," his envoys jeered. The Crusaders, now both besiegers and besieged, faced annihilation. Deserters who slipped past the lines reported Kerbogha's strength: siege engines, Kurdish mercenaries, and even a contingent of Byzantine traitors. Morale collapsed. Knights accused Bohemond of greed for triggering the crisis. Priests held masses to avert divine wrath. Then, on June 10th, a Provençal peasant named Peter Bartholomew claimed a vision. St. Andrew had revealed the Holy Lance's burial site beneath Antioch's cathedral. Skeptics abounded. Raymond of Toulouse's chaplain called it a fable, but desperation bred belief. Digging began in the cathedral floor. For 2 days, nothing was found. Just as hope waned, Peter leapt into the pit, emerging with a rusted spearhead. The discovery electrified the camp. Raymond of Toulouse, seizing the moment, brandished the relic as proof of God's favor. Processions circled the walls, priests chanting psalms as starving men found renewed strength. Kerbogha, baffled by the Crusaders' sudden defiance, tightened his siege. Attempts to scale the walls failed, but his archers pinned the defenders. Inside, food vanished entirely. Horses, cats, even rats became luxuries. Yet the Holy Lance's legend grew, with tales of miracles: a monk who survived 3 arrow wounds, a well that briefly flowed with wine. Delusion and devotion kept the army alive. By June 28th, the Crusaders resolved to break the stalemate. Against all logic, they would march out and attack Kerbogha's superior force. Priests absolved the army of sins, promising paradise to those who fell. Formations assembled at the gates, emaciated knights clutching swords and crosses. The Holy Lance led the vanguard, its rusted point a symbol of divine wrath. The Holy Lance. Peter Bartholomew's revelation divided the crusade. While Raymond of Toulouse embraced the Holy Lance as genuine, Bohemond and the Normans dismissed it as a fraud. Theological debates erupted amidst the siege, with priests citing biblical precedents and knights questioning Peter's credibility. The relic became a political tool, with Raymond using it to bolster his authority against Bohemond. Peter doubled down, claiming new visions. St. Andrew, he said, demanded the Crusaders fast barefoot and attack Kerbogha immediately. Skeptics noted Peter's ties to Raymond's faction, accusing him of manipulation. Yet, in the suffocating gloom of Antioch, many clung to the lance as their only hope. Even doubters admitted its psychological power. A starving army needed miracles to survive. The relic's influence peaked during the Battle of Antioch. As the Crusaders charged Kerbogha's lines on June 28th, priests carried the lance ahead of the ranks. Witnesses later swore they saw spectral warriors riding alongside them, a host of saints led by George and Demetrius. Whether divine intervention or mass hysteria, the effect was real. Crusaders fought with frenzied abandon, their hunger forgotten. Victory did not silence critics. After the battle, Bohemond demanded Peter prove the lance's authenticity through trial by fire. In April 1099, the peasant walked barefoot over burning coals. He died days later from burns, discrediting the relic in Norman eyes. Raymond, undeterred, kept the lance until his death. Its legacy endured as both inspiration and cautionary tale, a symbol of faith's power to unite or delude. Rout of Kerbogha, Crusaders defy death, 1098. The Battle of Antioch began with a gamble. Outnumbered 3-1, the Crusaders split into 6 divisions, each targeting a segment of Kerbogha's sprawling camp. Turkish scouts had dismissed them as too weak to attack, allowing complacency to set in. At dawn, the gates opened, and the Crusaders advanced in eerie silence, the Holy Lance at their fore. Kerbogha's coalition crumbled from within. His Arab and Kurdish allies despised each other, refusing to coordinate. When the Crusaders struck, many Muslim units fled or held back, expecting others to bear the brunt. Turkish horse archers, usually lethal in open terrain, found their arrows useless against the Crusaders' tight formations. Panic spread as the infantry pushed forward, slaughtering those who stood their ground. By midday, Kerbogha's camp was in flames. Crusaders plundered tents, gorging on abandoned food and wine. Kerbogha himself escaped, but his army dissolved into a rout. The victory defied all military logic, later attributed to divine intervention. Chroniclers wrote of saints descending from heaven, while Muslim accounts blamed Kerbogha's arrogance. For the Crusaders, it affirmed their status as God's chosen. The win came too late for many. Thousands had perished during the siege, their bodies piled in mass graves. Survivors, too weak to celebrate, collapsed amidst the loot. Antioch was theirs, but the cost was staggering. Worse, Bohemond and Raymond now openly vied for control, their rivalry threatening to shatter the crusade. Jerusalem remained distant, its gates still barred, but for the first time, victory seemed possible. Siege of Ma'ara, 1098. In December 1098, the crusade faced a new nadir at Ma'ara, a Syrian town en route to Jerusalem. After a 3-week siege, starvation drove the army to unspeakable acts. Chroniclers admit, with horror, that Crusaders resorted to cannibalism, boiling pagan corpses in pots. The adults they roasted, the children they skewered, wrote one Arab observer. The atrocity shocked even hardened knights. Mara's fall offered little relief. The town's stores were meager, and the army disintegrated into chaos. Raymond of Toulouse tried to restore order, executing looters, but discipline had evaporated. Many knights abandoned the march, settling in captured Syrian towns. The crusade, once a unified force, fractured into desperate bands driven by survival, not salvation. The cannibalism at Ma'ara became a propaganda tool. Muslim chroniclers used it to paint the Crusaders as barbarians. Christian writers glossed over it or blamed pagans among the ranks. Modern scholars suggest starvation-induced psychosis, compounded by religious fervor. Whatever the cause, Ma'ara marked a moral nadir, a moment where holy war stripped men of humanity. Raymond finally rallied the army by invoking Jerusalem's proximity. "A few more marches," he promised, "and we shall bathe in the River Jordan." The remnants pressed south in January 1099, their ranks thinner but hardened by suffering. The holy city, they believed, would cleanse their sins if they could survive to reach it. Race to Jerusalem 1099. The final push to Jerusalem began in January 1099. With Antioch secured and Ma'ara's horror behind them, 12,000 Crusaders marched south along the coast. Local emirs, fearing another Ma'ara, offered bribes for safe passage. Raymond of Toulouse and Robert of Normandy led the vanguard, securing ports like Tortosa and Ramla to shield their flanks. Fatimid Egypt, now controlling Jerusalem, watched with alarm. Vizier al-Afdal Shahanshah misjudged the Crusaders' intent, sending envoys to propose shared rule of Syria. The Crusaders rejected his offer, intent on liberating Jerusalem. Al-Afdal scrambled to reinforce the city, dispatching troops and stockpiling supplies. Time, however, was against him. By June, the Crusaders reached Bethlehem. On July 7th, they crested the hills overlooking Jerusalem, a moment of collective awe. Many wept, others kissed the ground. The city's walls, though formidable, seemed surmountable compared to Antioch. But the Fatimids had prepared. Al-Afdal had poisoned wells outside the city and stationed archers on every tower. The Crusaders' first assault failed miserably. Ladders snapped under the weight of armored knights. Greek fire incinerated siege towers. With water scarce and summer heat rising, despair returned. Then, a Genoese fleet arrived at Jaffa, providing timber for new siege engines. Priests organized penitential processions, mirroring the Battle of Antioch. Divine favor, they claimed, would tip the scales. Siege of Jerusalem, 1099. The Siege of Jerusalem began in earnest on June 13, 1099. The Fatimid garrison, led by Governor Iftikhar ad-Dawla, numbered 1,000 troops, too few to man the walls fully, but enough to repel direct assaults. Al-Afdal's relief army gathered in Egypt, forcing the Crusaders to act swiftly or face annihilation. Water scarcity became the attackers' deadliest foe. The nearest springs lay miles away, guarded by Fatimid raiders. Knights drank blood from their horses' veins. Men sucked on stones to simulate moisture. A nighttime raid captured sheepskins filled with brackish water, but dysentery ravaged the camp. Death, not glory, seemed imminent. On July 8th, a priest named Peter Desiderius claimed a vision. The army must attack barefoot to emulate Christ. Processions circled the city, singing hymns as Muslim defenders jeered. On July 13th, the new siege towers rolled forward, one commanded by Godfrey of Bouillon, the other by Raymond of Toulouse. Archers exchanged volleys while sappers hacked at the walls. The final assault began at dawn on July 15th. Godfrey's tower reached the northern wall, despite being doused in Greek fire. Flemish knight Ludolf of Tournai led the charge, dying on the ramparts but creating a breach. Raymond's tower faltered, drawing defenders to the north. As the sun set, Crusaders flooded the city, their pent-up rage unleashed. Storming Jerusalem, bloody capture 1099. On July 15, 1099, the Crusaders launched their final assault on Jerusalem. Godfrey of Bouillon's siege tower, shielded from Greek fire by soaked animal hides, reached the northern wall near Herod's Gate. Flemish knights led the charge, their ladders swarming with armored men. Fatimid defenders hurled stones and burning pitch, but the Crusaders' desperation overpowered them. A Norman soldier named Arnulf of Schoch breached the ramparts, his sword cleaving through the guards. By midday, the northern gate fell, flooding the city with invaders. Raymond of Toulouse's Provençal forces faced heavier resistance at Zion Gate. Fatimid troops, reinforced by Sudanese archers, repelled 3 waves of attackers. Raymond's tower caught fire, collapsing in a heap of ash and screams. Yet the diversion allowed Godfrey's men to secure key streets, advancing toward the Temple Mount. Panic spread among the defenders as Crusaders raised banners atop the walls. Governor Iftikhar ad-Dawla retreated to the Tower of David, negotiating safe passage for himself and his guards, a privilege denied to the city's civilians. The battle pivoted to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, where Fatimid soldiers made a last stand. Tancred of Hauteville, a Norman prince, promised mercy to surrendering fighters, but his offer was ignored. Crusaders overwhelmed the mosque, slaughtering those inside. By nightfall, Jerusalem was theirs. Chroniclers described knights weeping at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, their blood-stained hands clasped in prayer. The cost, however, was catastrophic. Nearly 10,000 Crusaders perished in the siege. The victory stunned the Islamic world. Jerusalem, third holiest city in Islam, had fallen to an army many dismissed as barbarians. For the Crusaders, it was divine validation, a miracle akin to Joshua's conquest of Jericho. Yet the euphoria soon curdled into horror as the full scale of the sack unfolded. Massacre of Civilians, Sack of Jerusalem, 1099. The sack of Jerusalem remains one of the Crusade's most contentious legacies. Chroniclers like Raymond of Aguilars boasted that blood reached the horses' bridles, while Arab accounts describe streets choked with corpses. Muslims and Jews who sought refuge in synagogues and mosques were burned alive. Women and children were slaughtered alongside soldiers, their bodies looted for jewelry and coins. The massacre was not spontaneous but systematic. After securing the city, Crusader leaders permitted 3 days of pillaging, a reward for years of suffering. Knights claimed homes and mosques as their own, evicting or killing occupants. The Jewish quarter was razed, its survivors sold into slavery. Tancred of Hauteville reportedly spared some civilians in the Dome of the Rock, but his mercy was the exception, not the rule. Apologists framed the violence as divine justice. Priests cited Old Testament precedents, comparing the slaughter to King Saul's destruction of the Amalekites. Yet even among crusaders, dissent emerged. Some knights refused to partake, appalled by the brutality. The massacre hardened Muslim resolve, galvanizing future resistance under leaders like Saladin. For Jerusalem's indigenous Christians, the sack brought mixed fortunes. Eastern Orthodox and Armenian clergy were expelled from holy sites, replaced by Latin priests. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre became a Frankish stronghold, its rituals aligned with Roman Catholicism. The Crusaders, though conquerors, remained outsiders in a land they scarcely understood. Battle of Ascalon, crushing the Fatimid relief, 1099. The Crusaders' triumph in Jerusalem was nearly undone weeks later. Vizier al-Afdal Shahanshah, commanding a 20,000-strong Fatimid army, camped at Ascalon, poised to retake the city. Outnumbered and exhausted, the Crusaders debated, defend Jerusalem or meet the threat head-on. Godfrey, against Raymond's advice, chose audacity. On August 12, 1099, 1,200 knights and 9,000 infantry marched into the coastal plains. The Fatimids, confident in their numerical edge, underestimated Crusader resolve. Godfrey split his forces, hiding infantry in orchards while knights feigned retreat. When the Fatimid cavalry pursued, hidden crossbowmen unleashed volleys, sowing chaos. A charge led by Tancred of Hauteville shattered the Fatimid center, capturing al-Afdal's camp and treasury. The vizier fled barefoot, his army scattering into the desert. Ascalon secured Jerusalem's southern flank and enriched the Crusaders with Fatimid gold. Yet they failed to capture the city itself, a strategic blunder that left Ascalon as a Muslim stronghold for decades. The victory's psychological impact outweighed its tactical gains. To the Islamic world, Ascalon proved the Crusaders were not temporary invaders, but entrenched foes. For the rank-and-file soldiers, Ascalon offered closure. Many returned to Europe, their vows fulfilled. Those who stayed faced a new reality, governing a fractured realm surrounded by enemies. The Crusader States, though victorious, stood on precarious foundations. Godfrey of Bouillon, advocate of the Holy Sepulchre, 1099. With Jerusalem secured, the Crusaders faced a critical question: who would rule it? Raymond of Toulouse coveted the title of king, but his arrogance alienated the nobility. Godfrey of Bouillon, respected for his piety and fairness, emerged as the compromise choice. On July 22, 1099, he was proclaimed Advocate of the Holy Sepulchre, a title acknowledging Christ as Jerusalem's true sovereign. Godfrey's reign began with crisis. The city's wells were poisoned, and Fatimid raids strangled supply lines. He enacted strict rationing, forbidding knights from hoarding food. To secure the coast, Godfrey allied with Italian merchants, granting them trade privileges in exchange for naval support. His diplomacy stabilized the fledgling kingdom, but his refusal to wear a crown, "I will not place a golden circlet where Christ wore thorns," masked political shrewdness. By rejecting kingship, Godfrey sidestepped tensions with the church and rival nobles. His death in July 1100 remains shrouded in mystery. Some attribute it to typhoid from contaminated fruit, others suspect poisoning. Godfrey's brother Baldwin, already ruling Edessa, rushed to Jerusalem to claim the throne. Unlike Godfrey, Baldwin had no qualms about kingship, crowning himself Baldwin I on Christmas Day 1100. Godfrey's brief rule set enduring precedents: fusion of monastic idealism with feudal pragmatism, dependence on mercenaries, and fraught relations with Eastern Christians. His legend, however, outshone his achievements. Chroniclers recast him as a chivalric paragon, obscuring the compromises that kept his kingdom alive. The Crusader States, year 1100. By 1100, 4 Crusader states dotted the Levant: the county of Edessa, Principality of Antioch, Kingdom of Jerusalem, and County of Tripoli. Each reflected its founder's ambitions. Baldwin of Bouillon transformed Edessa into a feudal march, reliant on Armenian auxiliaries. Bohemond of Taranto ruled Antioch as a Norman autocracy, resisting Byzantine claims. Raymond of Toulouse's son Bertrand carved Tripoli from coastal sieges, while Baldwin I formalized Jerusalem's monarchy. These states were hybrids of East and West. Frankish nobles adopted local dress, dined on spiced meats, and minted coins bearing Arabic inscriptions. Syrian Christians and Jews, though second-class citizens, found niches as translators and artisans. Muslim peasants, taxed but tolerated, farmed lands under Frankish lords. The Crusaders' initial zeal gave way to pragmatism, intermarriage, trade treaties, and even military alliances with Muslim neighbors. Sustainability, however, hinged on constant immigration. The Crusader States' population never exceeded 250,000, reliant on Italian merchants and pilgrim traffic. Castles like Crac des Chevaliers became symbols of defiance, yet their garrisons were perennially undermanned. The seeds of decline were planted early: dynastic squabbles, resource scarcity, and the rise of Zengi and Nur ad-Din in Mosul. For Pope Paschal II, Urban II's successor, the Crusader States were a divine mandate. He issued bulls encouraging settlement, promising indulgences to those who defend the Eastern Church. Yet Rome's influence waned as the states prioritized survival over papal decrees. The First Crusade's legacy was a patchwork of fragile realms, their fate tethered to Europe's fickle attention. Death of Pope Urban II, year 1100. Pope Urban II died on July 29, 1099, weeks before Jerusalem's fall. News of the victory reached Rome posthumously, vindicating his life's work. His successor, Paschal II, inherited a church transformed. The Crusade had centralized papal authority, marginalizing secular rulers and Eastern Orthodoxy. Tithes from reconquered lands enriched the Vatican, funding cathedrals and monasteries. Urban's legacy was paradoxical. He envisioned the Crusade as a unifying act, yet it deepened Christian schisms. Byzantine Emperor Alexios I resented the Crusader states' independence, while Armenian and Syriac Christians chafed under Latin dominance. The pogroms against Jews left a stain Urban never anticipated, undermining claims of holy righteousness. In Europe, the Crusade ignited economic and cultural revolutions. Italian city-states, Genoa, Pisa, Venice, monopolized Mediterranean trade, their ships ferrying pilgrims and timber. Returning knights brought silks, spices, and Arab scholarship, seeding the Renaissance. The feudal system, however, buckled under the cost of endless crusading, hastening its decline. Urban's canonization process began in the 12th century, but stalled due to controversies. Modern historians debate whether he was a visionary or opportunist, a question reflecting the Crusade's tangled morality. Aftermath: Clash of Civilizations. The First Crusade's aftermath reshaped 3 continents. In Europe, it spawned mythologies of chivalry and divine favor, immortalized in songs like the Song of Roland. For the Islamic world, the shock of Jerusalem's loss ignited movements like the Sunni Revival, culminating in Saladin's reconquest in 1187. Byzantium, caught between Crusader ambition and Turkish resurgence, spiraled toward its 1453 collapse. The Crusader states limped into the 12th century, buoyed by occasional reinforcements like the ill-fated Crusade of 1101. Their existence depended on Muslim disunity, a fleeting advantage. When Zengi of Mosul captured Edessa in 1144, the Second Crusade proved incapable of reversing the tide. Cultural exchanges endured despite the violence. Arabic numerals, medical texts, and irrigation techniques seeped into Europe via Crusader intermediaries. Conversely, Gothic architecture influenced Islamic designs, seen in the pointed arches of Aleppo's citadel. The Crusades, for all their bloodshed, forged unexpected connections. Modern parallels remain fraught. The Crusades' framing as a clash of civilizations oversimplifies its nuanced reality, a tapestry of faith, greed, and improvisation. Its lessons resonate in an era where holy wars and cultural collisions persist, reminding us that history's darkest chapters often defy easy judgment. Final question: triumph of faith or prelude to conflict? Was the First Crusade a sacred triumph or a catalyst for centuries of strife? For medieval Christians, the capture of Jerusalem affirmed God's favor. Yet the Crusader states' eventual collapse and the atrocities committed tarnished this narrative. Muslim historians, like Ibn al-Athir, framed it as a temporary setback in Islam's inevitable triumph, a view vindicated by Saladin's victories. The Crusade's true impact lies in its paradoxes. It united a fractured Europe while alienating Byzantium. It enriched Christendom culturally while impoverishing it morally. It birthed legends of heroism and horror, their echoes shaping modern geopolitics. In the end, the First Crusade was neither purely sacred nor solely destructive. It was human, a story of ambition and frailty, courage and cruelty, whose legacy remains as contested as the lands for which it was fought. Thanks for enjoying our video. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more interesting historical topics. As an up-and-coming YouTube channel, your support means the world to us, and we greatly appreciate it. We'll see you next time.